Greetings and welcome back to yet another episode of Lua modding tutorials, and in today's video I'm gonna show you some of the new callbacks which were added in the latest update. And there are a lot of new callbacks, easily more than 30, and I don't want to go through every single one of them because that would be a bit redundant, so what I'm gonna do is just focus on these 5. And these 5, if you kind of look at what they do, they're pretty much very similar to what we already know. So MC post update, MC post render, and a lot of the other callbacks follow the same philosophy, like for example MC post tier render or MC post projectile render and things like that. So you can kind of guesstimate as to what these callbacks would do. And I just want to go through these 5, like I said. And hopefully once I explain this 5 to you, you're gonna be able to generalize it and use pretty much any other callback. And of course, if you have more questions, if maybe there's a callback I missed, please drop me a comment and let me know because I want to make a follow-up video. But I feel like if I explain this 5, I should pretty much cover 90% of the new callbacks. So with that said, let's jump right into the code. So welcome to the code. Of course, the first thing we do here is register the mod and just as usual, save it to the variable to use for later. And then we also have a bunch of helper variables, debug text, which is gonna show you on the screen about what's going on in the code as we're actually playing through the game. The very first thing I want to focus on here are the callbacks, that's why we're here of course. And the very first callback here is MC post pickup init callback. And just in general, any init or initialization callback is going to be used whenever something begins to exist in the game. On the very first frame of its existence, this is the callback or the functions which will be called. In this particular case, because this is a pickup init callback, it only ties to, of course, pickups, but if we had something like MC post laser in it, that would tie only to lasers. And that is much better than what we had before, because what we had to do is go via the MC post update. We would have to check if the frame count of that particular object we're interested in is on 0, and of course that would take a lot of system resources and just generally would kind of look ugly and wouldn't be very well optimized. But now whenever a new pickup is initialized, begins to exist, this is the callback that's going to be called. This function is going to get called with the parameter of the pickup which has begun to exist. And this is from the class entity pickup, and of course it inherits and has all the properties and objects of the entity class, and that allows you to basically do whatever you want when a certain pickup begins to exist. And then we also have 2 functions which we're already familiar with to some degree, and that is MC post pickup update and MC post pickup render. And we all know what the update and the render functions do. Essentially, every time something is updated or called or rendered on the screen, these are the callbacks which will be used. But in this particular case, if you want to do something like you want to change the sprites of just the coins, there's no point in using the MC post render because that's going to be called every single frame, of course. And you only want to rely or tie that to coins, of course, and the way you do that is by using the MC post pickup render, because this is only gonna get called whenever a pickup is actually on the screen to be rendered. So that's just gonna allow you to be just a little bit more optimized and just a little bit better when you're actually writing your code. It's not very, I would say, influential, but it definitely helps with code organization and also helps you just to kind of classify things just a little bit better when you're actually making your mods. And then we have 2 new callbacks which haven't been seen before, and the very first one of them is MC post pickup selection. And selection, essentially whenever a game has to decide on which pickup to give you. So you're gonna get a chest at the end of the room, or you're gonna get a key or a bomb or anything like that. But before, when it decides, this is the callback that gets called after it decides, but before it actually spawns the pickup into the game. And what ends up happening, of course, this function is called, and in here again you get the entity pickup which is about to get spawned, and also just as a help you get the variant and the subtype of the pickup which is going to begin existing in the game. And of course you can do whatever you want with this. You can check if it's a particular pickup you want or don't want, but what you can also do is replace that pickup. And what I do here is essentially every time a new pickup is spawned, I just say, don't spawn that, instead spawn this instead. And of course this is the variant 30 and subtype 1, which correlates to keys. So now whenever a pickup is about to get spawned, it's gonna get replaced with a key, which is in some cases a good thing, in some cases a bad thing, but it's just an example. The next thing we see here is the collision, and of course this again exists for pretty much every single object in the game. So it's about lasers, brimstone, knives, things like that. When in this particular case, this only ties to the pickups. And of course, whenever we collide with a pickup or any other entity which collides with a pickup and has any effect on it, this is the function that's going to be called. And of course, this is the pickup that we're colliding with. The collider is whichever entity is colliding with the pickup. And then the third one is a Boolean variable low. I'm not really sure what it does, but I think it has to do something with half sprites and just how they relate whenever you collide into something. I'm not entirely sure because even that description was kind of half-assed, but in general, I'm not really sure what it does, but I don't think it really matters all that much unless there are some other things going on in the code which I'm not really aware of. But essentially, whenever you collide with an entity or a pickup, you can use these functions, the collision functions, to kind of help you about, kind of deal with those collisions in some regard. And in this particular case, what this function also allows you to do is return false or true or return nil. And in each particular case, it allows you to say, well, will the collision function that is coded inside of the game be activated? So that sounds a bit confusing. But essentially, when you walk over a key, the collision callback is called. This is this one. And then the game decides. So if there is a false in there, that means I don't want to pick up the key. The collision will still work, of course, but the script which executes picking up the key and despawning the key is not going to get executed. You can force it to happen by saying return true, but if you want the game to kind of revert to its default state, then you would just return nil or don't return anything at all. So in this case, I say return false just to kind of show you what effect that will have on the game. But essentially, whenever we walk into the distance of a key, in this particular case, because we're only going to have keys, we're not going to be able to pick it up, we're just going to be able to kick it around. So the last thing here is a very special callback, like it doesn't rely to the pickups, but I felt like it was just something that I should note because it didn't exist in the game before. And essentially before we had the MC use item callback, but that would only work on custom items that were made by you, of course. And in this particular case, we got a new callback called MC pre-use item, and this is basically the very same callback. Like whenever you use an item, this is the callback which is going to be called, but this one works for everything, and you just get the item ID, but also the RNG class of that particular item, which allows you, of course, to set the seeds and just check if it's the right seed or a random number generator to do whatever you want it to do, basically. But yeah, I just wanted to point this out because it's something new which hasn't existed in the game before, and I felt like it would be worth mentioning. So now that we kind of know all this, let's go into the game, and I'll kind of try to take a second gander explaining about what we just saw here. So welcome to the game now, and what I've done is I already spawned the key on the ground just so you can see that it's actually there, and the update and render loop are already running. They're just kind of showing you, well, this is existing in the game now, and the key is being rendered on the screen, which is of course a good thing. The next thing I want to show you is the collision, and that's going to be the last one, I believe. So that is whenever we walk into the actual key, it's going to tell us that we've collided with that particular key. And of course that is correct, but because we return false, that means that the script which is usually responsible for picking up the key is not going to get run, which means that this won't get picked up, so we can kind of kick things around. So that's alright, but now we want to see the actual spawning of the key. So what I'm going to do is just give myself debug 10, to fast kill enemies and just walk into the next room and hope that something gets spawned. And of course, a key gets spawned, like maybe something else would have gotten spawned in its place, but because we returned 31, we're always gonna get a key. And of course, when this happens, we can see that the game has selected a 10-1, which is something else than what we got, because the key is 31, which means that our code works. So now that means that this is basically it. Of course, everything seems to work and just act how it's supposed to. And yeah, these are the new callbacks, which I think should be very useful if you're trying to basically do anything else, because you could do these things before, but they were just very severely under optimized, but now of course they work just a little bit better. So thank you for making it to the end of this video as well. And of course there are a lot of new callbacks in the game now, and they're very helpful because they allow us to optimize our functions just a little bit better without having to rely on maybe dirty hacks and things like that, so that's always a positive. But I did only scratch the surface here. I only kind of tackled a few of them, and there weren't really concrete examples, just maybe more explanations of how they worked. And if something is still unclear, maybe you have more questions, maybe you want me to focus on a very particular callback, I'd be more than happy to do so. Just let me know by dropping a comment, leaving a message on Discord, or even just sending me a message through YouTube. It doesn't matter, just contact me somehow and tell me, hey, I want you to cover this or maybe explain this because I don't really understand it. And I'll try my best to come up with a few new examples, maybe figure out what's going on, and maybe, you know, we can learn something together from that experience. So with that said, I hope you enjoyed this video, guys, and I hope to see you next time.